It's our weekly visit with TSN hockey insider Pierre LeBrun. And Pierre, you had a chance to speak with both Dallas Stars GM Jim Nill and Colorado Avalanche GM Chris MacFarland after the trade deadline. And what a trade deadline it was for both of those Central Division rivals. We're going to start with Colorado and show you what they were involved in. They move out Mikko Rantanen back in January because the two sides couldn't come to an agreement on an extension. But Colorado, as we can see, very busy at the deadline. Pierre, what did MacFarland have to say about the way his team looks now versus before the Rantanen deal?
Well, first of all, it was Jim Nill that made the point about Chris MacFarland in those interviews. It's not every day in the salary cap era that a GM can basically change over a third of his roster in season, which is what the Avalanche have done. And so he had a lot of compliments for his fellow GM. And it's true. You know, Jay, you've been around a long time. Since 2005 and the salary cap, it is so difficult to make a number of tangible changes to your roster once the puck drops in the fall. The salary cap just really has a paralyzing effect. And what MacFarland has done, and we'll see where it comes out in the end, obviously, we can't judge it yet, but you know, he was so aggressive going back to changing both his goalies in season.
Yes.
Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood. But obviously the Mikko Rantanen blockbuster, which again, we'll judge in a number of years, you know, should Colorado stuck longer in that negotiation and try to find a way to sign him. They made a judgment call that his number wasn't going to come down enough. And, you know, we kind of joked, but I said to Chris MacFarland, obviously you never thought when you dealt Mikko Rantanen to Carolina on January 24th that it'd be not only back in your division, but possibly on the team that you may play in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And he laughed. He said, no, obviously not. But I got to say, Chris MacFarland has so much affection and respect for Mikko Rantanen. His voice got pretty serious when he said, listen, that guy's an absolute superstar, and I honestly wish him the best there in Dallas. And you could tell he wasn't just saying that for PR purposes. But it's nuts. It's nuts because it's the Mikko Rantanen Bowl probably in the first round between Dallas and Colorado. It's nuts, as both GMs acknowledged. It's a conference final level type series if it happens, Dallas, Colorado right off the bat, because they've been two of the most aggressive teams this year improving, going back to, of course, Granlund and Ceci as well for Dallas before they win the Rantanen sweepstakes. So it's fascinating theater. And by the way, they play Sunday in Denver, the Stars and the Avs.
It's wild, and you bring up such a great point. The fact that Rantanen ends up with Dallas, a team that has been Colorado's rival going back for a long, long time, as you alluded to. And I understand that Jim Nill was pretty open with you, Pierre, about the acquisition of Mikko Rantanen.
Yeah, and you know, he got word about 2 weeks out from the trade from Carolina that this was a possibility, although at the time it still felt like the Hurricanes were telling teams that were probably more likely to keep him. But Dallas is one of the teams that they reached out to because, as it turns out, as we now know, Dallas is on that small list of teams that Rantanen would be interested in potentially extending with as part of a trade. So once Jim Nill got that info, holy, he was in first gear. And part of what he did, by the way, is he said he did canvass the number of Finnish players he has on his team who know Mikko Rantanen well. Rupi Hintz, as Jim Nill says, is a very close friend, but also obviously he's got Miro Heiskanen and Esa Lindell, and so he canvassed those guys, and of course Mikael Granlund, and he got as much feedback as he could before he really dug in, and he offered a lot, as Jim Nill acknowledged. But this isn't for one swing at it this year for the Dallas Stars. Man, are they set up now, health permitting, to take a number of swings in the next few years. Wyatt Johnston signed long-term. Obviously, Mikko Rantanen signed long-term. They signed the number one goalie, Jake Ottinger, to a long-term deal before the season. Thomas Harley is signed. He's coming into his own. On and on. I mean, the core of this team is pretty much locked up, and they should have a number of swings at trying to win a cup, not just this year.
And Jim Nill's incredible draft record, picking up someone like Logan Stankoven, who would be appealing to anyone, facilitates the deal as well. Just an incredible job by Jim Nill. We have learned since Friday's deadline, our friend Chris Johnston reporting that the Leafs asked Mitchell Marner to potentially waive his no-trade clause as a potential return for Mikko Rantanen. from the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, Marner will be an unrestricted free agent unless he's extended by July the 1st. You've had a few days now, Pierre, to digest all that has happened over this past week. What is your read on where things stand between Mitch Marner and the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Well, first, let's just go back to Rantanen for a second. I mean, the Leafs were in their heart. And not only that, if Rantanen comes to Toronto, he comes as a signed player. It would have been like Dallas. He would have signed an extension with the Leafs. And so you would have the fascinating, situation there. Now, here's the other thing. Once Mitch Marner, said, I'm not waiving, and by the way, that's totally his right. That's why you have a no move in your contract. The Leafs were still, as you know, still trying to get Rantanen even past the Marner conversation. I mean, but the last offer they made was seen by the Hurricanes as just too futures heavy and not enough help in the here and now because Carolina is trying to salvage their season and they see in Logan Stankoven the kind of player that wasn't available in Toronto's last offer. But this is what I want to raise. If the Leafs' last offer would have worked and they would have got Rantanen here signed to a long-term deal, you would have had Rantanen as part of this year's Leafs team with Mitch Marner still on this year's Leafs team, but Mitch Marner as a pending UFA. I'm just fascinated what those locker room discussions would have been like if Mikko Rantanen showed up as a signed player here with Mitch Marner still unsigned. Having said all that, here's where it gets interesting to me because I think if you're Mitch Marner, I thought handled it really well when he met the media in Denver and he didn't sugarcoat it. He said, yeah, all this happened and, I wasn't that shocked. One of the things that this will tell you how this will go is this. Is the relationship hurt now because they tried to trade him and does that impact his desire to stay? Or does it go the other way, Jay, and Mitch Marner realizes, whoa, that was real. I just realized I love this team. I want to stay here. So does he eventually sign? And was the impetus this situation that gave him clarity in the moment? It's hard to say which way it'll go. But let me add one more thing, and I know I'm rambling here. David Pastrnak, when he signed his contract extension a couple of years ago in Boston, it was right near the trade deadline, if you remember. And not a lot of attention was paid to this part because he signed, but there was internal pressure in that camp. When I'm talking about David Pasternak's camp, they were feeling the real scare potentially being dealt by the Boston Bruins at that deadline if they didn't sign.
Right.
Who knows if that was a bluff at the time, but I can tell you that whether it's a bluff or it was real, it affected in the end the fact that everyone involved wanted to get that extension done at the trade deadline, even though the Bruins were a first-place team at the time. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, a lot of people are surprised this happened with Marner. It's Brad Treliving's job to manage his assets, and of course, he'd much rather have Marner signed than traded. I mean, that's clear. But it's his job to manage the assets of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And for him not to have at least investigated this opportunity, I think he wouldn't be doing his job, even though it might have hurt some egos. That's just the reality of it.
I think you point out something that a lot of people are forgetting. Next up for Marner and the Leafs, a home date with the Florida Panthers, the team they trail by 2 points in the Atlantic Division. It's going to be fun to watch. Pierre, LeBrun, love having you on the show. We'll talk to you next week, okay? Thursday night, 6:30 Eastern. Molson Leafs hockey. You got a little Florida Panthers, you got a little Toronto Maple Leafs, and it's all right here on TSN if you have TSN in the Leafs region.